Hi, I'm Stephen Price.
Hello, I'm Cara Githens.
This is The Innkeepers, a podcast by Sanctuary Inn. At Sanctuary Inn, we believe we are called to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers.
On this podcast, we will be interviewing guests who have much to teach us about the many facets of missionary care. Let's learn together and be encouraged to press on in the work God has given each one of us to do. Hello, I'm so glad you guys are with us today. Today we have the privilege of talking with a couple who has some good experience in working with the whole issue of child safety, emotional, physical, sexual safety. And so this is kind of a heavy topic. So if that's kind of a trigger for you, just wanting to let you know, I think they talk about it in a very respectful way. So I'm hoping that this would just really open the door for some important conversations for many of us.
Yeah. So today we're going to hear from Kenneth and Ellen. They've been living and working in Southeast Asia for the last 19 years. Currently, they're both trained forensic interviewers of children and have participated in numerous responses to alleged harm of kids and vulnerable adults in the mission world. This harm includes all types of abuse and neglect. Kenneth and Ellen also are great friends of Sanctuary Inn.
Thanks for joining us. Hello, we are so glad to have you, Kenneth and Ellen, here with us today on our podcast. Can you please just share a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so for the last 20 years or so, we've been living and working primarily in Southeast Asia. But before that, I grew up in the Philippines, and that's my entire childhood. I was born there, I graduated from high school there, and part of my story is that we moved around a lot. We, of course, moving back and forth from the Philippines to the States, always living in different states. But even in the Philippines, we moved around a lot, spent some time living way up in the jungle, thatched roof hut, no running water, no electricity, the whole bit. And by the time I was in high school, we were actually in Manila, and I went to Faith Academy there. But um, had a lot of different living situations too. You know, I think sometimes I think I missed my calling because I was set up well to be an educational consultant for TCKs because, you know, I've done the homeschooling and the jungle thing. I've done the boarding school. I've done private school and public school in the US. And even had I was living in a dorm that my parents were the dorm parents of at one point, which that was pretty rough. But it was no longer than 2 years in the same place anywhere in my childhood, you know, and some of it was, you know, sometimes it was just a few months or just a few weeks in one place and we're moving on to the next. So a lot of mobility. But yeah, that was my childhood.
And I have a very different background than Kenneth. I grew up in Oregon and I was born and graduated from high school living in the same house. So didn't move even one time until I went to Bible school when I was 18. And I was called into overseas work at a very young age after going on some short-term trips with my church. And that was a surprise to me. Nobody else in my family has done missionary work, I guess, at least on a long-term basis. And so, yeah, came as a shock to all of us. And then after that, this calling to do child safety work was also a surprise to me. I don't have a background in social work or even really an educational background, but I've always loved kids. And so that's really important to me now and very meaningful part of what I do. But anyone that knows us knows that we love good food and we love coffee.
Hmm.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing.
You mentioned the topic of child safety. Can you just kind of expand on that a little bit and tell us really what does child safety mean in the missions context?
Yes. So It's something that has a few different terms depending on what mission you're talking with. Traditionally, we called it child safety or child protection. Now, a lot of agencies and organizations are moving towards the term safeguarding for a few different reasons, but partly to differentiate it from certain other aspects of safety and security. So, we do talk about things with kids like don't play with matches and don't go swimming by yourself, because those are important things too. Generally, when we're saying child safety or safeguarding, we're talking more about preventing harm, such as all forms of abuse and neglect, which includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, exploitation, and neglect. And then we also want to respond well as an organization whenever harm occurs.
That's a helpful distinction that, there is safety that I think a lot of times, especially American cultures, like, have car seats in the car and having all these things, but that's not the child safety we're talking about. We're talking about emotional and physical and sexual safety for children all over the world. So, what are some of the things that an organization does to kind of handle these kinds of things?
Yes, we have a process that we walk through. At least I can speak for our organization, which is Pioneers. So we have a safeguarding team, which started a little over 10 years ago, I believe. Man, maybe closer to 15 years ago now. And we have a process that we walk through every single time that we get any kind of concern. So it starts with somebody usually within our organization filling in what we call an intake form, and they'll just put on there something they saw, maybe something someone told them, potentially a child disclosed something to them. Or it could be as simple as, you know what, they just something didn't sit well with them and they were like, I really need to talk to somebody about this and see if I should be worried. So yeah, we get things that sometimes turn out to be pretty simple and we can deal with it easily. It's just maybe a misunderstanding or something. And then we get things that turn out to be quite serious. So we start out, we get that form, it goes to our international safeguarding officer, and then she forms a sub team made up of members of the bigger child safety team. And we come together and look at that, talk with the parents. And again, sometimes this whole process takes like a day because it's just quickly resolved. And then other times it launches a longer response, which can really last up to a year or two, depending on what happens. We don't always do interviews, but sometimes we do find it necessary to send an interview team. And we have specially trained interviewers with lots of training in interviewing children and then also doing forensic interviews for adults. And so it's rare, but maybe 2 to 4 times a year, we end up having responses that require us to then send a team of interviewers to the location to talk with all the people involved and find out where we go from there and to make sure they get whatever help they need.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it can be a hard topic to talk about because essentially we're acknowledging that in Christian and especially in mission circles, things are happening with children that are wrong. Can you just kind of address some of the maybe some of the stigma even like, oh, this doesn't happen or this shouldn't
Yeah.
happen here or anyway, things like that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. That's a really good question. And let me just going back to my story, thinking about I told you that we lived in a lot of different places when I was growing up. Two of the places that we lived in that were pretty different from each other. And the question is, and you can tell that it's a trick question because I'm asking it this way up front. But the question is, which one of these do you think is more safe? So one of the places we lived was actually in a village where all of our neighbors were former headhunters. And again, there's no way, like if you get hurt, you got to wait for the plane, or it's a 12-hour walk out of there. And they're communist rebels living in the jungle. They're armed and they're at war with the government. That's one environment that we lived in. Another was a gated community. There was a barbed wire fence all around. It was a well manicured lawn and fruit trees, and everyone who lived on that campus were their missionary families, and we're all Christians, and we all trust each other because we're all there for the same reason, right? We're all there to bring the gospel to places that to especially tribal groups that haven't heard before. So between those two places, again, if I hadn't asked it that way, I'm sure you might think, you might assume that the place where, it's all Christians and we're keeping, what perceived to be the danger out of that environment, that would be more safe. But it's actually, especially because of the trust that's in that environment, that environment is particularly dangerous. Because we are all missionaries here, so we trust each other with our kids, among other things, and even it can be an environment where there's less accountability, less
Hmm.
visibility sometimes, because it's just because we trust each other, because we're all Christians. So everything that we learned about stranger danger when we were kids. It's a real fallacy, because yes, I mean, strangers can be dangerous. Abductions by strangers sometimes does happen, but the real danger is comes from the people that we trust the most.
Hmm.
And that was the case for me and my friends growing up. One of the dorms that I spent some time in, one of the dorm dad in that dorm, he was for about 8 years. He was he was sexually abusing especially the girls in the dorm, but also the boys. And he was also our Bible teacher, by the way. He'd preach in our little church on Sundays, and he'd have his victims sign a statement that they swear on the Bible that they wouldn't tell anyone, especially their parents, about what was happening in that dorm. And I myself, I was groomed this uh, person, but not abused. But most of my friends, ranging all the way from first grade through eighth grade, most of my friends were sexually abused by this guy. So that was part of when um, Ellen got the opportunity, 10 plus years ago, to get involved in doing what we can to make sure that the world that our kids grow up in is safer than the one that we grew up in. And I was all for it, and ready to do whatever I could back then to make sure that to create that opportunity for her to participate in that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a heavy story, and that's
Mhm.
I'm sure carries a lot of its own pain. Um, I do think that there is this safety that comes, perceived safety, from in the missions community, and um, that can really be, in the long run, damaging when someone really isn't trustworthy. Uh,
Mhm.
can
Yeah.
you share a little bit about what happens to children when allegations of harm are ignored or downplayed? And
Yeah.
perhaps like this man, everybody probably
Yeah.
I mean, for all those years, for rumors not to be floating around, or, it just seems just inconceivable that there wasn't, someone didn't have a whiff of something going on. And
Well, yeah, my dad, they would watch Monday Night Football with this guy. It wasn't available online, but I mean on the TV, but someone would send VHS tapes, and they would try not to find out what the score was, and
right.
he would come over to our house and watch football with my dad, who my dad considered him a good friend.
Mm.
Um, and there was, I think, among the adults, mm, no, I don't think they had any clue until some of the victims started speaking up.
Wow.
Um, I think what's even more shocking is, well, two things. One, this was not just happening at this school. This was in the Philippines, but with this organization in particular, but others as well. There's schools in South America and Africa and all over the world. This was happening at the same time, and the response of the organization to these things, when they did find out what was happening, was roughly the same. Um, And the way the organization responded, instead of getting people the help that they needed, instead of mitigating the harm, actually compounded the harm to the point where I genuinely believe that if you take the total good that happened uh, in that environment where lots of very good things were happening. This is supporting tribal works where the gospel was being brought into tribal groups that wouldn't have an opportunity to hear the good news otherwise. But the total harm that that was suffered by the kids in that location, that was compounded by the way the organization responded. It would have been better if that place never existed.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so um, when my friends tell their story, um, there was, of course, the initial harm, the sexual abuse is a big deal, and that's a lot of what they're still trying to deal with. But when they tell their story, the way the organization respond is very clearly it's a second and in many ways more harmful um, um, trauma in their story, because in that moment when you finally pluck up the courage to ask for help, to let someone know that something's happened, and you're very confused about what it all means, when the people who are supposed to protect you, the people who are supposed to help you, instead prioritize the reputation of the organization, um, or what they perceive to be the greater good. They end up compounding the harm. They end up making it worse. And well, okay, so look at Matthew 25, when Jesus was talking about judgment. Um, the the kinds of thing the kinds of things Jesus mentions in that passage, it's not an active harm. It's not going out and beating people up, or stealing from people. It's I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was hungry and you didn't feed me. It's all this. You could have done something to help this vulnerable person, and you did nothing. And um, that's I mean that's the sort of stuff that Jesus was particularly upset about. Vulnerable people like children who need help. If you don't help them, um, that's real bad.
Hmm.
And it speaks to the nature of the gospel. We're over there, we're emissaries of the good news, and if we shy away from addressing uh, sin, from looking at what it is and for dealing with it, it's the horror of the cross is the only response to the ugliness and the harm that sin causes. What kind of messengers of the good news are we if we try to cover up, um, or hide from the harm that sin is causing within our communities? It's
Hmm.
um, yeah, it's not okay, and we can do better, and that's the good news.
Hmm.
Yeah, and just to clarify that the organization Dave mentioned was not Pioneers,
Right.
but we as pioneers want to learn from those mistakes that they made, both unintentional and intentional, so that we can do a better job of caring for children and families as we preach the gospel to the unreached.
Hmm. Well, and it's sad. I mean, often things that women and children say are so often downplayed that until a man comes out and says it, an adult male, it often it there's no weight behind it, or very little weight. And just thinking back about your reference to Matthew 25 and how there was just not the care and concern shown for the vulnerable, for the least of these.
Yeah, those historically, I'm guessing that this has been the response throughout, the last 50, 60 years of missions that's been super active. Um, there's been a lot of neglect and omission in the caring of children, and I'm sure wives, and there's been a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, and it's heartbreaking to think that really in your mind, like the good that was done in some ways is like negated by all the evil that was done. Um, and that the
Yeah.
balance is not even, I mean, thank God that he is still at work despite all of us.
Mm.
But it is heartbreaking to realize that, so many MKs were wounded in that situation
Yeah.
talking
Hmm.
about. So, what
Sometimes
you guys,
people ask us
go ahead.
Sometimes people ask us what child protection has to do with the church planting,
Hmm.
since Pioneers is primarily about initiating church planting movements among unreached peoples. And I think that's completely tied in with what we were just talking about, that um, I mean, for families to stay on the field and thrive, they really need to be safe and have good access to resources and support. But beyond that, what a testimony to those that we're trying to engage with, that yes, we're sinners, but we have the gospel. We're in communities where we hold people accountable and we value children, even just for the fact that they're made in the image of God. And so it definitely is important on a number of levels as we seek to spread the good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus was not shy about commenting his concern and love for kids and bringing them in, putting them on his lap, telling his disciples, don't make life difficult for he said, and he just commented on their vulnerability and their, they don't have any standing in society. Children of anyone, there's no standing in society for them.
Yeah.
And so we
No
do have,
voice.
yeah, no voice. So we do have a responsibility to care for them.
So as you guys are trying to make a difference and break this cycle in many ways and be a part of the change, what does it look like to implement training and awareness programs in your organization and other organizations, um, to kind of change this pattern of history that's been happening?
Yeah, this has been something that's been encouraging to me, even to see how far we've come in the last 10 years or so. Yeah, it's just doing simple things that have made a big difference. I think all of the kids now, before they even go to the field, they have like a basic body safety training. And then we do more training for the adults to pre-field. And we have a basic training everybody needs to do. And then each year we have an annual refresher training that is mandatory. And we translate that into about 7 languages to make it more accessible to all of our members in different parts of the world. And that annual training, we can tweak it each year to kind of deal with what are new things that are coming up potentially. Like right now, there's a lot of digital stuff that we're all trying to keep up with. Us as Gen Xers, it's like some of that stuff is very outside of what I grew up with. And so, one of the things that we're looking at talking more about in the next year's training is sextortion, which is becoming a bigger issue amongst other things online. But I'm encouraged that I'm seeing we're doing a lot more preventative and proactive care on the front end. And that even includes things like family debriefs, just to deal with routine things. We're so globally mobile, there's a lot of grief and loss that compounds for third culture kids and all of us that are in this kind of globally mobile lifestyle. And so we're hoping, again, and I think we are seeing that people are seeing problems before they develop into full-blown crises often. So of course, we're not going to prevent every single thing from happening.
Yeah.
But I think I'm encouraged personally, at least, that we're able to focus more on that now that we've had this program going for about a decade. And so in the beginning, it felt like, we're kind of playing catch up. We just have to do so much and it's really overwhelming. Where now I'm like, yeah, we've got a good program in place. We've got this process that works really well so that we can respond well when there is a crisis, but we're also hopefully avoiding a lot of crises before they happen.
Hmm.
It's just
Hmm.
kind of raising the awareness level for everyone, the
Mhm.
pre-field trainings and all this stuff, and not normalizing the abuse and or the potential abuse, as acceptable, which I think is a lot of what had
Hmm.
been happening in decades previous, is that that kind of behavior was somehow acceptable or ignored or embarrassed, and like we don't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
shoved aside. um, and
Yeah.
kind of bringing it to the light, right? Like this is,
Hmm.
you know, a way to expose the darkness.
Are you encountering pushback from anyone, maybe not your mission people, but maybe, or just when you talk with supporting churches and so on, is this like, oh, this I just don't get this, why this is even going on? And anyway, can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, I think particularly one discussion that we've had recently was with a supporting church that was concerned that they wanted to be sure that we're still involved in church planning, which I mean, it's a good question because, again, pioneers were there to glorify God by mobilizing teams, initiate church planning movements among unreached people groups in partnership with local churches. So if we're not doing that, then we are off task, and we do need to be corrected and put back on task. But the impact that having having a robust um, and properly executed safeguarding policy and responding well to situations where harm it not it primarily, I mean, the most important thing that it does is that it actually you get both the people who have been harmed, the children that have been harmed, and people who caused harm. You get them the help that they need in a timely manner, and the outcome for everyone involved, including preventing future abuse. It's already a massive gospel impact. Some of my friends growing up, they've the some of the better outcomes for them with the response that they had was, they walked away from their faith, but they're still alive and well. Not everyone was so lucky. Um, and so there's that impact, and that's the most important thing. But on top of that, when you go into a situation where there's where something's going on, and um, people are not feeling safe, and they're not feeling like their kids are safe, that's an environment where you're likely to lose some missionaries pretty soon. You're likely to lose teams possibly, especially if harm is actually happening and you don't respond well. The work is going to stop, and so that church planting can't continue. But if you do respond, times we are able to get people the help that they need on location, and they can continue to work. If that's to get their kids the help that they need, then they can continue to stay where they are and keep working. So yeah, the work that we're doing now, the last couple of years, I've also been able to. I joined the safeguarding team with Pioneers a few years ago, and I've been a forensic interviewer for that team for these last few years. And it's been, when we're when we go on a response and we're doing interviews on location, which we're leaving tomorrow on a trip just like that. Um, the it's a lot of work because there's the travel and the jet lag and the long days of exhausting interviews. You have to hear some really hard stories and deal with that. And for me, like I love it because I feel like it's worth it because we're saving lives, but also we're keeping the work going, and that's an impact that we're able to have now in church planting efforts all around the world.
Mm.
So I think it's not only is it still on task, it's more on task than almost maybe any other kind of work that we do.
Hmm.
Yeah, people don't always like us, and sometimes they don't like to see us coming.
Uh-huh.
But we're
Right.
good with it. We're okay with
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing retention work. You're doing the work
Yeah.
Yeah.
of being able to help families hopefully heal and thrive rather than completely fall apart, and give these children a voice. I
Yeah.
mean, the power of that is incalculable, really, truly.
Mm.
Hmm. I'm just curious if when you've had opportunity to share this in a public setting, if you've had someone come up to you and say, I've never told anyone this before, but I don't know if that's
Mm,
come to you or not, but I would imagine when they hear that there's someone that cares and there
Yeah.
is the acknowledgement of a situation that should not have been, maybe they feel the
mm.
freedom that, oh, I do need to talk to somebody about this.
Yeah, that does happen sometimes. Yeah, which again, it's such an honor to play a part in someone's healing process, even just a small piece. Yeah, to helpfully help them feel safe enough and to know they're not isolated, that they're not alone, and that many of us have gone through these things and that there's really good help and resources available. So yeah, every once in a while, it definitely brings up something for people.
Hmm. We've touched on this in a couple different ways, but is there anything else you want to comment about this situation if it goes ignored or unreported or not dealt with? Do you want to comment anything else about that?
Well, I think, I mean, I can say that, um, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So I know that organizations, when they respond is similar to the poor way that my parents' organization did, that they mean well. They believe that the work that they're doing is important and they want that work to continue, and they're uh, afraid of what might happen if it gets out that that this sort of harm was happening in the context where they were working. But their priorities are all screwed up. They're thinking that I mean, the line of logic goes like this, because what we're doing is good for the church and the world. Then if we is then protecting us and protecting our reputation is important, because it's another misunderstanding of what the gospel is, because we this idea about having a good testimony as a person or as an organization is, we think it's this idea that we present to the world that we're perfect and we never make mistakes and nothing bad ever happens around us. And that is not the gospel. The gospel is that we're all broken people, and we um, even for the people in the organization that didn't cause harm directly, they created that situation where harm happened. So to be able to stand up and say, yeah, we didn't mean to, but people got hurt. And now we're going to acknowledge that, and we're going to do something about it. Actually, if you want really, I think if you really understand what having a good reputation as an emissary of the gospel is, then standing up and telling the truth in a situation like that is absolutely the right thing to do. And is not only that, it's a testimony to the gospel, that we all need saving all the time, and we're all in that journey together.
Yeah, we like to encourage people that if you were harmed, it's never too late to tell. It's really common for people not to be able to talk about it or sometimes even remember it till much later in life. And I think sometimes people think then like, oh, well, what's the point, of coming forward now? And that this is not to put pressure on anyone, because only you as someone who's been harmed can decide if and when it's right to disclose and who you want to disclose to. It's your story to tell. But just to encourage people, if something happened to your child yesterday, or if it happened to you 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it's never too late to get help and to pursue deeper healing. And also to, yeah, go ahead and report that to the agency if there was an organization involved, because it may be too late to get justice in the way that you might hope, but it's still a good thing. Yeah, to speak the truth in love. So yeah, just to encourage people if they're feeling like, "Ah, what's the point?" If God's prompting somebody and they want to disclose, even just to a counselor in a safe space, that's a really, really brave thing to do.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's bringing things to the light. It's
Hmm.
There's always a transformation that comes in the light.
Hmm. Amen.
Hmm.
So, so what are the consequences for someone who's been accused of violating, and hurting others? I know that it's a hard thing to kind of pin people down in these contexts where it's international law, it's this country here, the citizen here. I mean, I've known people who wanted to report but didn't even know how to report because
Hmm.
it's, how do you even stop a perpetrator like that?
It's a good question, and I think it's especially because a lot of times when we're made aware of a situation, it's not even necessarily starts from a disclosure, it something that just looked off and had a weird feeling about it, and they think something might be going on, is often that's where it starts. And if you're concerned that, if I report this, it's going to become a big deal and everybody's going to know that I thought that that person was maybe possibly harming kids, and that fear right there could be enough to for your mind to tell you a story that makes that situation okay. So then the actual harm that may be happening never gets reported and never gets dealt with. So yeah, let's say, I mean, so there's really, if you've seen something that's concerning, there are two possible scenarios. One is that it really is no big deal, and nothing really happened, and the other is that there's a lot more going on there, and there is actual harm. Now, let's assume that you are part of an organization that has a good process that is based on, all the best that we know about how to respond to a safeguarding situation. And if you're not, then then I would encourage people to keep asking about that until things get better. Because it's such an important part of what we do as a missions community is protecting the vulnerable people within our spheres of influence. But let's assume that you're part of an organization that has a good process. If in the scenario where you what you saw really was nothing and it was no big deal, in the response to that, since we follow the same process every time, and that process uh, values confidentiality, and it values understanding the situation while and responding in a very thoughtful, methodical way, then something that was not a big deal will continue to not be a big deal. And even, say you've just had um, um, the way that you have been ordering your life, you created this situation somehow, right? Where somebody saw you in a weird situation, and maybe it was nothing, but you put yourself in that weird situation where someone could think something about you. So in that scenario, then at least you'll be able to get the help that you need to understand that this looked weird, and you can do better.
Yeah.
So
You're giving people the creep.
yeah. You're giving the people the creeps, and here's how you can you can stop that. In the other scenario, where you've seen something and actual harm is actually happening, then following exactly that same process in exactly that same way will bring that out. And then, both people that are being harmed and the people that are causing harm, everybody in that situation needs help. And our process and our team is committed to getting everyone the help that they need to move forward. So again, if you're part of an organization that has a good team and a good process, you have no reason to be afraid of reporting what you saw or what you're concerned about, because regardless of what happens, the outcomes are going to be good for everyone involved when the team follows that process.
Yeah. And we aren't a legal enforcement body. We're not the police of pioneers. We're just this safeguarding team. And so when we look at things, we say it's more likely than not that this happened. And so sometimes people are terminated. That's the only burden of proof that we need to meet, is more likely than not. And then we always report to all of the legal entities that we need to report to, and we let them handle that side of it. We'll just give them what we know, and then they take it from there, as they're much more qualified to do that whole part of it. As you said, is very complicated, and we have a lawyer who helps us know when we're unsure, who do we need to report to, and what countries, as it can be so complex.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So say someone's not in an organization that has a system in place. I mean, it sounds like Pioneers has really worked hard at this. So other organizations, smaller organizations, what do people do?
Yeah, this is a tough one. So you can, as Dave alluded to, you can pressure your organization. They may or may not listen to you, but I highly recommend starting to scare them in a good way. Just by letting them know, hey, this is a big deal for our family, but also for legal ramifications as well. That we can be seen as negligent if we don't have these in place. It'll probably actually come back to bite us and hurt us financially or otherwise. And so there's a really great group called CSPN, the Child Safety Protection Network, and they're a body that you can join. You can send representatives from your organization, and they basically give you kind of like an accreditation if you do their training. And then they're just amazing because once you're part of that network, you get access to all of their resources. And then if you have a situation, like say that your organization says, okay, great, we don't have anyone who does this, you do it. And you're like, well, I don't know how to do it. Um, you can go to these trainings at CSPN and they will help you to learn everything you need to know, how to do interviews, how to create all the documents, trainings, processes that you need. And they're a Christian organization, so all of their values are biblically based.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's great to even know that there's an organization out there that can be a resource to perhaps these smaller organizations that need to have something in place and don't. So thank you.
Hmm. So, um, wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing and for talking about this. And it's not been an easy conversation. So, but as we wrap up, we just are always looking for resources, books, trainings. I appreciate the information on the CSPN. Is there anything else that you want our listeners to know, or resources you want our listeners to have or be aware of as we kind of wrap up this topic?
Yeah, there's some really great stuff out there these days. One book that I really like is called Too Small to Ignore. It's by Wes Stafford, who is with Compassion International, and he grew up in Africa. And so he tells his story of many things, but one of the parts of his story is about being harmed at a boarding school in Africa. And as we know, yeah, boarding schools were so common, as Dave talked about, especially back in those days, a couple decades ago. And it's very personal and vulnerable and moving, but just helps to have a better understanding of um, what helped him to start on his healing journey, and then helped him to, yeah, do a great job as the head of this big organization called Compassion International. A website you could go to is called From Darkness to Light, and it is D, the number two, L.org, Darkness to Light. And they have a lot of good information about how to protect kids from sexual abuse and then how also to respond if you suspect there's something going on.
That's great.
I'm also happy to have people reach out to us if they have questions or concerns, and we can, yeah, make our contact info somehow available to people.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, we can put it in the show notes if that's what you guys want.
Okay.
And then we can people can reach out to you because sometimes people just don't know where to go. They just feel kind of stuck
Yes.
and
And it can feel overwhelming. It's great. There's so many resources now, but yeah, you're like, where do I even start? So, yes, we're happy to try to point you in the right direction. We have very limited knowledge, but we're connected to a lot of really smart people.
yeah. Sometimes it's all about who you know, right?
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for just being willing to bring light to this topic. There are kids out there that are hurting, and
Mhm.
we need a way to help their voices be
Hmm.
heard. So I'm so
Yeah.
grateful
Yes.
for all that
Yeah.
you guys are doing.
And I'm concerned too for the adults who have been hurt and
Mm-hmm.
a chance to tell anyone their story, and just would hope that they sense the freedom to talk with someone.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you guys for being willing to talk about it. It is difficult, and yeah, we appreciate you.
Hmm. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Cara, can you share something about this conversation today?
Yeah, I just was really actually encouraged that there's an organization out there that's being very systematic and careful and strategic about caring for the children who are the vulnerable ones in this situation, and that there's a way to get them help and the perpetrators to get help too.
Yeah.
And just it's a very needed topic that needs to be addressed in so many situations around the world, and that I was just encouraged that one organization is doing it, and then there's the CSPN that is there as a resource, and just that this isn't in the dark anymore.
Right.
That really is encouraging to me.
Yeah, it's obviously a serious and at the same time heavy conversation, but I appreciate it somewhere in the conversation. I think Kenneth said that in a hard situation like this, everyone needs help. And that is the goal, that there is help available for everyone involved in a situation like this. And certainly the goal is restoration and forgiveness and so on. But first of all, just recognizing that this is an issue and a concern. The Christian world is not immune from this conversation. And I appreciate just their ability to be so candid and open with us.
Yeah. And I'm just hoping that for those of you out there that perhaps have seen something or heard something, that this won't just get swept under the carpet in your circle, that you would speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for joining us for the Innkeepers podcast. Our mission at Sanctuary Inn is to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers. We hope today's podcast was an encouragement to you, or maybe the podcast you heard today, you've been prompted to pass this along to someone you know that could benefit from today's conversation. Creating a podcast is a team effort. Cara and I prepare and do the interviews, and we're grateful for the time that our guests give us out of their busy lives to help us learn more about missionary care.
We want to thank Tim Downing for the music he wrote and performed for the Innkeepers podcast. Tim is a very talented musician, and you can find out more about Tim at downingkeys.com. Our podcast is edited by Javier Bolanos, and our website and show notes are prepared by Micah Githens, my amazing husband. You can visit the Sanctuary Inn website to see more of Micah's great work at sanctuaryinn.org.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn more about missionary care.